Welcome back to this episode of the Mayoral Podcast, everybody. I am your host, Matt Mayer. In this episode, we're talking about COVID. We're talking about the Biden administration's 180 policy on the southern border. We're talking about revised GDP and the chaos that has happened in Congress over the last week or so. Before I get into all that, please make sure you hit the like button, subscribe, share with friends and family if you like the content you see here today. So jumping right into it, first topic of the day. Again, as I mentioned, we're going to talk about COVID. It's the story that will seemingly never go away is COVID-19. What's happening? What happened in the past? The policies that didn't work, the lies that were told, and everything seems to be on repeat for the Biden administration and administrations all over the world trying to implement some type of COVID policies that didn't work the first time and going to try to play that back again this time, all the while pretending like they worked and there was no forced vaccination, anything of that nature. So the first story here is from the Daily Skeptic. It's MHRA, which is the Medicines and Health Products Regulatory Agency, and that's in the United Kingdom, finally admits it failed to test the safety of mass-manufactured COVID vaccine batches. Give you a little bit of a background here. This highlighted section here is just talking about how the processes of manufacturing anything start on a small scale and then scale up from there. So you don't want to put in all this infrastructure in building all these facilities or getting all this raw material and putting it into a huge batch. In this case, if it doesn't work, so you do a smaller batch and make sure that works, and then you go on and do a multiplier and make sure that it fits the amount of people you're looking to service, and use that as the kind of concoction, so to speak, that you make moving forward. Kind of similar how the author uses an example here of how you would make cupcakes, and if you start with a large batch of cupcakes, if it's wrong, you got to throw out a lot of waste. But you would start with, say, maybe a dozen cupcakes. It works. Then you go and test a larger scale. Say you make, 1,000 cupcakes, and you got to make sure that they turn out the same. Obviously, when they're in larger containers, the mixing process is a little bit different. So you would go back and make sure you do that. So in this article, it talks about that's how the vaccines were initially manufactured, which makes sense. They start off on a small scale and then go to the larger scale. But the point is that they were supposed to test the larger scale product, which they never did. So in this article, down a little bit lower, it says, it also turns out that they promised a comparison between process 1 and process 2, process 1 being the smaller scale process, process 2 being the large scale process. Product remained a condition for authorization until September 2022, when the EMA and the MHRA eventually acquiesced to Pfizer's argument that the promised comparison was unnecessary due to the extensive usage of vaccines manufactured via process 2. So this is saying that they were looking for this data, and then by the time mass vaccinations happened, Pfizer just said, "Oh well, we've already injected so many people, like there's no need for this research," and they just let them get away with it. So it's really quite amazing that these were not tested. Again, if you were making cupcakes on a large scale, you would test the cupcakes from the second process to make sure that it fits and tastes similar to the first process before you just started mass selling the cupcakes. There could be something wrong in that process, and again, through trial and error, you would adjust that process accordingly. That never happened with the Pfizer vaccine, and that's where you see a lot of issues with what happened with Pfizer, with the vaccine. And this is why, one of many reasons why, it's not as safe as the people claim it to be. Then you have this here. So if you don't believe me, this is the Surgeon General of the state of Florida talking about the safety of the vaccine. So listen to him and decide for yourself if you think it's safe or not.
What would sort of be the top 3 points that you think your average person should get across about this booster, the science behind it, or what do you think is, where do we start with this conversation when we say maybe you want to do a little bit more investigation?
First, it is really, so many people think that there are clinical trials for these boosters. They do not exist. There are no clinical trials that inform their safety or their efficacy, let alone the tiny, minuscule clinical trial data we do have from Moderna. There were safety events, and we don't even know what those were.
Right.
So there's no clinical trial data for these about safety or efficacy. People need to know that. I mean, so many people who are in doctors' offices receiving it do not know that.
Right.
The second is that there appears to be a concern about negative vaccine effectiveness with a biological root. And what that means is that now there are multiple studies that show that individuals who receive the vaccine, studies from all over different countries, different parts of the world, that people who receive the vaccines are eventually at an increased risk of contracting COVID-19.
So that continues on. The big thing I wanted everyone to see was the safety information, that they did not put boosters through clinical trials like they should. There's very little information. I went over this in my previous episode with regards to the Moderna clinical trials. They can't claim that this is safe. They don't have a large enough scale. Again, back to the way that these were manufactured in the first place. This time they're not even testing the first round of this batch. They're just putting it out on a mass scale. At least the first time they tested it on subjects. This time they're not even doing that. So it's becoming, in my opinion, it sounds like the opinion of the Surgeon General of the state of Florida, it's becoming less safe than the previous ones that already had a bunch of adverse effects to them. Then you look at Kevin Bass. He's a good follow, at Kevin N. Bass on Twitter, or X, whatever you want to call it. He's talking about the evidence for randomization when it comes to masks. Now, this press release here is from Marin County in California, and it says, Marin County has announced a measure to protect residents and healthcare workers during the winter virus season. In alignment with other Bay Area counties, effective November 1st, 2023 through March 31st, 2024, Marin County Public Health will require masks be worn at hospitals and skilled nursing facilities to limit the spread of seasonal respiratory viruses, including RSV, influenza, and COVID-19. So, again, we talked about this a few weeks back, maybe a month ago now, how they were going to start bringing masking back, even though the data shows that it doesn't do anything, and it doesn't matter to some of these places. They just want to show that they're doing something, and doing something that doesn't work is not helping anyone. There's people out there that have like extreme anxiety now from being out in public without having a mask on, or with being around people that don't have a mask on. And the evidence from the beginning was that masks don't work. Here's another post from Dr. Bass here. It talks about the evidence of masks not working. And it says, the WHO found that masks don't work in 2019. CDC found that masks don't work in 2020. And Cochrane found that masks do not work in 2022. So there's links this is his tweet. He's got a couple of highlights here. It's from October 2nd. There's links to every single one of these studies. Here's just one of the reports here. It says, an analysis of studies pertaining to masks in Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report. Characteristics and quality of all studies from 1978 to 2023. Now, it says here in the abstract, the importance of it is that MMWR, which stands for the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report, has substantial influence on United States public health policy. And it is not externally peer-reviewed. It is critical to understand the science process within these journals. Mask policies during COVID-19 is one topic that has been highly influenced by data published in the MMWR. There's a breakdown of the results here, and it's 77 studies that were published after 2019. And it says 0 of the 77 were randomized studies. And that's important. I'm going to show a reason why it's important after I kind of go over these statistics here. It says 29 of the 77 assessed mask effectiveness, with 14.3 being statistically significant, but 75.3 stated the masks were effective. And it goes on to continue saying that they used kind of basic language. There was mannequins used in the study, and the conclusion results is kind of the important part here. The MMWR publications pertaining to masks drew positive conclusions about mask effectiveness in over 75% of the time, despite only 30% of the tests. Keep in mind, only 30% were even testing the masks. And 75% of the studies said that they were effective, which seems absolutely unbelievable, but this is information that was put out there that was, not only was it not randomized, again, I'll point to the importance of that, but the overwhelming majority didn't even test the masks themselves. Less than 15% having statistically significant results. No studies were randomized, yet over half drew casual conclusions. Again, what they were even testing has to be called into question, because this is reporting that 70% of the tests weren't even testing the mask effectiveness, and only 15% drew a statistically significant result. So this is from the NIH, the National Institute of Health, the National Library of Medicine. And I will just read the one highlighted part I have here, talking about randomized controlled trials. This says, randomized controlled trials, the gold standard for effectiveness research. This is the NIH, the Dr. Fauci's of the world, saying that this is the gold standard. Yet the science that they were using, that they were publishing, none of them were randomized, and over 70% of them weren't even testing the effectiveness of masks. Again, they're going to continue to point to these studies that are absolutely nonsensical and should not even been published in the first place, and have since been discovered to be fraudulent. And this is all in the name of safety and security and making sure people are healthy. And again, this is from the National Library of Medicine, NIH website, not my information from the NIH. This is the abstract. Again, this isn't my information. This is the NIH. The largest burden of COVID-19 is carried with the elderly, and persons living in nursing homes are particularly vulnerable. However, 94% of the global population is younger than 70 years old, and 86% is younger than 60 years old. So it's important in remembering what they've done with these recommendations, these mask and these vaccine recommendations. They've made it a recommendation on a broad scale, not saying specifically the people that are vulnerable, the people that are elderly. No, they've been making them across the board for everybody. So let's look at this study here. It says from 29 countries, and there was 24 of them high income, and then 5 others, so whatever that means, low income, mid income, whatever. Publicly available age-stratified COVID-19 death data information were available, including in the primary analysis. This is the infection fatality rate. Again, that's not my information. This is from the NIH. So the IFRs had a median of 0.034 for the ages 0 to 59, a 0.095 for the ages 0 to 69. So anyone under the age of 70, which again I pointed out is 94% of the population, 0.095. Let's round up and call that 0.1%. That's 1 in 1,000 people died from this virus. Now, I played a clip a couple of episodes ago. It was showing the information that was coming out from the organizations like the WHO that were saying the mortality rate was 3%. 3%. But according to this data across 29 different countries, NIH's website, not my website, according to this data, 1 in 1,000, less than 1 in 1,000 people under the age of 70 died. That's not even factoring in comorbidities or anything like that. That's just saying the infection fatality rate, period. That's it. It goes on to say the IFR was 0.0003% from 0 to 19 years old. And I'll go, it has all the other age ranges here, 20 to 29, 30 to 39, 40 to 49, 50 to 59, but the highest in this group was 0 to 69 years old at 0.506%. So even as we get a little bit more vulnerable, nearing 70 years old, less than 1%. Again, the WHO, at the beginning of this, sparking mass fear in the masses, was saying 3%. So break that down in the odds of you dying. So let's take the highest number, which was the 60 to 69. It's 1 in 197 died from coronavirus. It's, again, not counting any other comorbidities. It's just saying it's about a 200 to 1 shot that people in that age range got coronavirus and died from it. That's pretty statistically significant to say that some of the most vulnerable people in this population were dying at a 200 to 1 clip, roughly. Now, what is unbelievable to me is typically when there's an infectious disease or something that's going to be potentially catastrophic to the masses, the people that are protected first are the young, right? The children need to be protected. They're the future. They need to be the ones that we protect the most. That number that I gave you, 0.0003% infection fatality rate, is 333,000 to 1. 333,000 to 1 shot that these kids die. And there were people advocating for putting masks on these people. Mass vaccine for a 300 plus thousand to 1 shot that somebody contracts this virus and dies. These are the people making public policy. And again, showed it at the beginning of when I was talking about this. These are the people that are trying to, again, enforce mask mandates that from every available objective statistic, masks don't work. They're going to keep suggesting these ridiculous measures that did not work the first time, and they're not going to work this time. And I mentioned in my last episode, I was talking about Fauci and his 180 from saying that masks are not necessary in March of 2020, and then shortly after, he changed his tune and said that we all need to be wearing masks. And this is an article, this is NPR, it says Fauci, why the public wasn't told to wear masks when the coronavirus pandemic began. And this is from June of 2020. So again, he flip-flopped in the matter of a couple of months. Now, I think the important thing here is to remember what I pointed out last time, is that he lied at some point. Regardless if you believe he's lying now or he was lying then when he said that we didn't need to wear masks, the point is simply that he's willing to lie. And if you're on the side that thinks masks are saving lives, then he lied and told people not to wear masks, causing them to potentially lose their lives. So if he was willing to do that, what makes you think he's not willing to lie about something else? Just let that marinate for a little bit in your mind. If you're somebody who believes that masks absolutely save lives, and these people are telling you the truth, that he was willing to lie to you and tell you that masks are not necessary at the beginning of the pandemic, potentially causing hundreds of thousands, millions of deaths, if you believe that this virus was as deadly as they made it out to be. So from this NPR piece, from the NPR, this is the Hill. It says, he acknowledged that masks were initially not recommended to the general public, so first responders wouldn't feel a strain on the shortage of PPE. I don't know how he could have possibly made that assumption that there was going to be an absolute run on PPE. And I don't know if you've ever been to these hospitals. Like, they're not in dire need of masks at any given time. They have months worth of supply. So they could have allowed for the public to be getting masks. They manufactured them very quickly afterwards. And the people that were working, the first responders, could have had, and probably in most cases already did have, enough to get through that initial rush for this PPE. So again, if he was willing to lie about that, what else is he willing to lie about? He explained that public health experts, quote, were concerned the public health community, and many people were saying this, were concerned that it was a time when personal protective equipment, including N95 masks and the surgical masks, were in very short supply. Continues on saying, we wanted to make sure that people, namely the healthcare workers who were brave enough to put themselves in harm's way, to take care of people who were infected with the coronavirus and in danger of getting them infected. So, again, he's gone back. This is on the record. He said that he lied initially about the masks. I don't know how many times I could say it. I don't know how many times or how much clearer I can make it. Again, if he's willing to lie about masks, what makes you think he's not lying about masks? I mean, what else can I say about it? It's absolutely crazy. But people are still going to believe it. And hey, that's up to you if you want to believe it or not. I personally don't. Talked about it at the beginning. The 180 at the border. It says, this is from 2020. This is when Trump was saying, for the entirety of his presidency, we need to build the wall. We need to build the wall. He was getting stonewalled in Congress. Biden would end border wall construction, but would not tear down Trump's additions. So this is April 5th of 2020. Just the headline here. This is from NPR. I think most people know that. This is the policy that he's been running with. The administration has been doing recently, and I showed this article about a month or two ago now. They've been selling off unused parts of the border wall. Perfectly good pieces of the wall that were not being used, sold it off. Now, the 180 from the Washington Times. No mas. Admin admits immediate need for Texas border wall amid massive migrant surge. I mean, who could have guessed it? Who could have guessed it? You just you basically opened the border and said, "Hey, we're open for business," and a mass amount of migrants came, and it's been happening for 2.5 years now. And they're finally doing something. This article is from October 4th of 2023. This is from last week. It's unbelievable that they're doing this 180, and somehow people are still going to vote for him. I've showed videos before of the frustration that has been taking place in these highly or largely blue cities, these New Yorks and Chicago, my hometown of Chicago. People are pretty fed up with it. They're getting the scraps, and here's the thing, and they're right. In these lower income areas, they get less than they probably should, or less than they need in a lot of different areas from the taxpayer dollars. Now they're being put at the bottom below the migrants, and they're being kicked out of different places around the city. There's a youth football team in Chicago that is going to be kicked out, or just got kicked out this last week, of their practice facility. It was just an open field, is my understanding, because they needed to set up a refugee camp in the city of Chicago. These people are not learning from it. And when you think that they were going to learn from it, they come and pull a complete 180 from the 180. And they're almost back into the same boat. It's really quite crazy to see some of the things that has happened. So here's an example of the 180 from the 180. I played last week a clip of Eric Adams, the mayor of New York, saying that this was unsustainable. That was a 180. And this is, again, another reason why I think it's possible that they're not actually trying to get rid of Biden, because they can't. They've gone too deep and said, and in this case, they can't go back from Biden. They've lied too much about him or for him. They've lied too much to protect him. They've lied too much to protect Democrats, that if they do a 180 on him, turn on him, and then say, okay, this time we're telling you the truth about this guy or this girl, people aren't going to buy it. So again, I think the message came down from the higher ups to Eric Adams to change his tune, because again, just a few weeks ago, he had done a 180 from his original 180. His original stance was sanctuary city. A few weeks ago, we can't take any more migrants. And then this is from October 7th, just a couple of days ago, another 180 back to being in favor of leaving the border open. So here you go. Here's Eric Adams.
We believe the borders should remain open. That's the official position of this city, but we have made it clear there should be a decompression strategy, that we could properly deal with the volumes that's coming into our city, and no cities should have to carry the burden of the national government.
Okay, sorry. The post that I'm reading was from October 7th. The video itself said it was from October 3rd. So from roughly about a week ago. And then you have Kareem Jean-Pierre going to have to try to spin this 180 that they've made and try to make it make sense. So here's her talking about the border crisis, and I'm going to comment on that after she puts out this ridiculous statement.
How is this consistent with what President Biden pledged to do when he was elected, which is that he will not use any funds to use the border law?
Let's make this really clear. The facts are that this is not new, right? This is something that came from the last administration under the Republican leadership in fiscal year 2019, and we are required to do this. DHS is required to comply by the law. That's what we're doing here. And look, the president, he said this himself. He basically asked Congress to reappropriate the funds. They wouldn't do it. And so now we have to comply by the law. Now, this was something that was announced 6 months ago. DHS actually announced this 6 months ago. And so this is...
When I hear that, I'm like, the questions, and she shuts down a lot of these questions anyway, but the next question has to be asked, the obvious one. If it's required by law, then why weren't you doing it in the first place? It is, last time I checked, it is October of 2023, and Joe Biden and his administration took office in January of 2021. It's been more than 2.5 years. So why are they now complying by the law that was passed, like she said, in 2019, but they didn't have to comply by it before? It's a complete lie. It's them trying to play both sides, trying to say, okay, we realize how poor our policies are, and it's affecting our citizens in a very negative way, but still appeasing the far left side of their base, saying, hey, our hands are tied here. It's not our decision to do this. We didn't want to do this. We were just forced to by law. Again, pretty disgusting politics here, and it's costing a lot of people, especially in these lower income parts of these deep blue cities. And as we see the border continue to erode, we see inflation still remaining high, despite the huge increase in the Fed funding rate, all the way up over 5%. Biden is still trying to cancel student loan debt. This is from CNBC. This is from September 29th of this year. Even though Pelosi admitted that he doesn't have the authority, and the Supreme Court already struck down his attempt to unilaterally forgive student loan debt, Biden continues to try to do so. And you see him put out tweets like this. It says, some of the same Republicans in Congress who strongly oppose giving relief to students got hundreds of thousands of dollars of relief for themselves to keep their businesses open. Now, presumably he's talking about the pandemic when the government themselves forced these businesses to shut down. So there's a huge difference between people taking out money of their own volition and the government forcing people to either take money out. Like, that's not what's happening with student loans. Government's not forcing people to take money. And in this case, what he's referring to, presumably, is the lockdowns with COVID. And the government forced them to shut down, forced these businesses to shut down for, in some cases, 3 months, 6 months, sometimes a year. They forced these businesses to shut down. So there is a stark difference. Now, I can admit that they shouldn't have done that. The government shouldn't have done that. Now, that was under Trump. It was his administration. He did leave it to the states. But the federal government could have stepped in and said, hey, we need to keep things going. Trump was not innocent in all this. But they continued the policies well beyond when it was reasonable to do so. And we could talk about student loans, and I will, I'm sure, at some point, give my full opinion on student loans and where the country had gone off the rails with student loans. We can all admit that the system needs to get fixed. People shouldn't be paying $40,000 at state schools for general communications degrees or whatever BS degrees that these people are coming out of college with that have no real world value, that in some cases they owe as much as a small house when they come out. There's a lot wrong with what's going on in the education system right now, but Biden unilaterally forgiving debt to the tune of tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars of people who voluntarily took the debt out, that's not the answer to the situation. But he's going to continue to do it as the economy continues to tank. And it's interesting you see this. This is from Reuters, from the end of September, from Reuters. U.S. GDP revises down in every first quarter from 2020 to 2022. Now, what I find interesting is then I go check out this website here. And this is the Bureau of Economic Analysis. This is from the U.S. Department of Commerce. I like to point this out. These are not my numbers. I'm getting these directly off government websites in a lot of cases to kind of prove and illustrate my point that even their numbers, their data is out there. They put it out there and it just kind of, nobody mentions it. And I don't really hear many people in the mainstream media mentioning this because it's not a good look for the liberal media to point this out. Thursday, September 28th, 2023 is when this came out. And I will call your attention to page 7 here. So as I come down here, it's really stunning how bad these people are at doing their job, actually getting the GDP number. And how for 4 years, they got it wrong. They underestimated it. And then somehow for the last 2, they overestimated it. That's really shocking. That's crazy. So let's look at 2017. The light blue is 2.2. That's what was reported. The actual revised number was 2.5% GDP growth. Same thing in 2018. 2.9% was reported. 3.0 was the number. 2019. 2.3 was reported. 2.5 was the number. 2020, the election year. And everyone knows it was a crazy year. Negative 2.8 was reported. Negative 2.2 was the actual number. These are all revised after the fact, obviously. They didn't revise 2020's numbers in 2020. They revised them later. So then you got 2021. After 4 straight years of them underestimating GDP, they happened to get an overestimate the first year of Joe Biden's presidency. That's crazy. 5.9 was what the original number was reported, and 5.8 ended up being the number. So pretty close, but wow, they seem to snap out of that streak of underestimating GDP pretty quickly as soon as Biden took office. 2022, estimate of 2.1. Actually, 1.9. You could clearly see that there's something going on here, right? You don't have to be a genius to say they got it. They underestimated GDP for 4 years Trump was in office and then overestimated for 2 years that Biden was in office. That type of stuff isn't just random. That doesn't just randomly happen. There's something going on there, and I think a lot of people realize that. So meanwhile, you have the fight over power in Congress. You have the looming shutdown that actually ended up getting extended. There was a 45-day stopgap that was put in place to continue spending until Congress figured everything out. Now, they still haven't, as of today, it's Monday, October 9th. Maybe by the time I air this, I would assume that they will have picked a new Speaker of the House. I believe they're going to have that later this week. So they should presumably come to an agreement on who the next Speaker of the House is. But meanwhile, last week, and it's now about 10 days ago, Kevin McCarthy was ousted as the Speaker of the House. This here is just showing, when asked who was responsible for the government shutdown, the largest group of people responded Joe Biden and the Democrats. It says America's waking up. This is from September 29th. This is before the shutdown was supposed to happen. Obviously, they got that stopgap in there. It stopped it from happening. But people realize that it's not just the Republicans that are causing this, that it is Democrats. And I think it's important to realize that when it comes to these continuing resolutions, these omnibus bills, this is how the government has been governed essentially since the mid-90s, that there hasn't been individual spending bills. And that's one of the main points as to why the breakdown happened with the ousting of Kevin McCarthy as Speaker of the House. Matt Gaetz, one of the representatives from Florida, was adamant that was one of the sticking points. We need to reduce spending. The best way to do so is to get these appropriations bills into, I believe they break down into 12 different bills, and then debate the merits of the bills instead of just saying we're going to continue spending the money that we have been in these continuing resolution bills, or this is how we're going to fund the government moving forward, vote yay or nay. It's for every different part of the government. Here's the omnibus bill. It's 5,000 pages. Good luck reading it. You're going to vote on it tomorrow. So I agree with Gaetz, and I think a lot of Americans do. I don't know any liberals that would say, no, we shouldn't have an individual, we shouldn't have single subject category spending and see like where are we spending this money and debate that instead of debating defense spending versus education spending versus parks and recreation spending or whatever. wherever the spending is going, like you can't say, you can't really debate the spending in each little bucket. You have to defend it all or reject it all. So I agree with Gates on there. I see so many people coming out and you see Fox News coming out there and going against Matt Gaetz. I get it. It's politics. This isn't how things work. This is going to backfire, so on and so forth. People don't remember what happened. They don't even remember what happened last week. Forget about what happened, when the elections come around. It's going to be a year later. Like, people are not going to remember that this happened. It's not that they're not going to remember, it's not going to be something that's top of mind when voting for their next elected representative in the 2024 election. So I wholeheartedly disagree with the people on Fox. I disagree with the people saying that we just needed to keep doing things the way that we had been doing in the past, and this is how we get more representatives in Congress and how we change things. Something had to change, and I'm glad that Gaetz did what he did. We'll see ultimately if it's going to be something that's a net positive for Republicans and for conservatives, or if it's going to be a net negative. Time will only tell where we're going to end up there. But it's my opinion that this is going to end up working better than if we had just kept Kevin McCarthy as the speaker. Now, two of the main nominees are Jim Jordan and Steve Scalise. We'll see which one we get. I prefer Jim Jordan. I think most conservatives would. We'll see where we end up with that. But the sky's not falling. Government's still funded. If we could get individual appropriations bills, this will be a win for conservatives. That's it for this episode of the Mayoral Podcast. Please make sure you hit the like button, subscribe, and share with friends and family if you like the content you've seen here today. And I will see you all in the next video.